A desperate millionaire eager for an heir decides to pay a homeless woman to carry his child. The homeless woman accepts his proposal. No promises of affection, just a transaction. The millionaire begins to develop feelings for her, but when the babies were born, everything changed. Watch until the end to see this beautiful story full of twists and surprises. The New York skyline glittered against the dusk, its lights reflecting in the windows of Mason Blackwood's penthouse office. From the 78th floor of the Blackwood Tower, the city looked like a miniature display, small, manageable, and entirely under his control, just how he liked everything in his life. Mason's fingers tapped impatiently on his mahogany desk as he stared at the financial reports on his computer screen. Another billion-dollar acquisition completed. Another victory to add to his empire. At 45, Mason had amassed more wealth than most people could imagine in 10 lifetimes. His real estate conglomerate, Blackwood Enterprises, dominated the skylines of 12 major American cities. His political connections extended to governors, senators, and even the White House. Yet as the evening shadows lengthened across his immaculate office, the emptiness that had become his constant companion settled heavily upon him. "Mr. Blackwood," his assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your 7 o'clock appointment is here." Mason pressed a button. "Send them in, Patricia." The frosted glass doors slid open, and his lawyer, Jonathan Miller, entered with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. "Jonathan," Mason nodded, not bothering to stand. "You have the documents." Jonathan placed the portfolio on the desk. "Everything's prepared as you requested, Mason. I still think this is—" "I didn't ask for your opinion," Mason cut him off, opening the folder to review the contract inside. "I asked if the documents were ready." Jonathan sighed and straightened his tie. "Yes, they're ready, but as your lawyer and your friend for 20 years, I have to advise against this course of action. There are other ways to secure your legacy. Adoption, perhaps, or—" "Adoption?" Mason scoffed. "And raise someone else's child?" "No. My heir will carry my blood, my DNA. This is non-negotiable." "Then at least consider a reputable surrogate agency. Someone with—" "I've made my decision." Mason's tone was final. "The arrangements have already been made. She'll be here in 10 minutes. Jonathan's expression tightened. "She? You mean you've already found someone?" Mason finally looked up from the document, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Providence delivered her right to me." As Jonathan left, shaking his head in disapproval, Mason walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and gazed out at his empire. 2 failed marriages had taught him valuable lessons. His first wife, Rebecca, divorced him after 5 years, claiming he was emotionally unavailable. His second wife, Vanessa, had been after his money from the start, a fact he discovered too late. The string of relationships that followed had all been superficial. Beautiful women attracted to his power and wealth, none of whom touched his carefully guarded heart. Now at 45, Mason felt time pressing in on him. He needed an heir, someone to inherit his empire, to carry on the Blackwood name. But he would not risk the messiness of love again. This time, he would maintain control. This would be a business arrangement, pure and simple. The intercom buzzed again. "Sir, your guest has arrived." Mason straightened his Italian silk tie. "Send her up." When the elevator doors opened directly into his penthouse office, Mason's eyes fell on the young woman who stepped hesitantly into his domain. Lily Foster was not what anyone would expect to see in the Blackwood Tower. Her faded jeans had seen better days, her worn sneakers were scuffed at the toes, and her blue coat, once nice perhaps, was frayed at the cuffs. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and though her face was scrubbed clean, exhaustion shadowed her blue eyes. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. "Thank you for seeing me." "Miss Foster," he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please have a seat." As she sat down, Mason studied her. 26 years old according to the background check he'd ordered. No criminal record. A nursing degree she'd never been able to use. Orphaned at 19 when her parents died in a car accident. leaving her with nothing but student debt. A series of misfortunes had led her to her current situation, homeless for the past 8 months, surviving on odd jobs and the generosity of shelters. "Would you like something to drink?" Mason offered, more out of habit than genuine hospitality. "Water, please," she replied, and he noticed how she tried to hide the tremble in her hands by clasping them in her lap. Mason poured water from a crystal carafe and handed her the glass. Their fingers brushed momentarily, and he noted her quick withdrawal from the contact. "I assume Patricia explained why I wanted to meet with you?" he began, returning to his seat. Lily took a sip of water before answering. "She said you had a proposition for me, a job of some kind, but she wasn't specific." "Yes, a proposition." Mason leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "One that could change your life forever." He watched her eyes widen slightly, a mixture of hope and wariness crossing her face. "I'll be direct, Miss Foster. I'm looking for someone to carry my child, to be the mother of my heir." Lily's hand froze with the glass halfway to her lips. I don't understand." "It's quite simple," Mason continued, his tone businesslike. "I need an heir for my empire. I don't want the complications of marriage or emotional entanglements. What I'm proposing is a straightforward transaction. You carry and deliver my child, and in exchange, I provide you with financial security for the rest of your life." Lily set the glass down carefully, as if afraid. "It might shatter. You want me to be a surrogate?" "In a manner of speaking, yes. Though the child would be biologically yours as well. We would use IVF, of course." "Why me?" The question was barely audible. "You could have anyone." Mason's lips curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I require discretion. Someone without complicated family ties or social connections. Someone who needs what I'm offering enough to agree to my terms." He paused. "Someone like you, Miss Foster." The color drained from Lily's face. "And what exactly are your terms?" Mason opened the leather portfolio and slid the contract across the desk. $5 million transferred to you upon the birth of my child, a comfortable allowance during the pregnancy to ensure proper care, the best medical attention money can buy." His eyes hardened slightly. "In return, once the child is born, you will relinquish all parental rights. You will have no claim to the child or to me. You will sign a confidentiality agreement and relocate to wherever you wish to start your new life." Lily stared at the contract, her fingers hovering over the pages as if they might burn her. "You're asking me to have your baby and then disappear?" "I'm offering you freedom, Miss Foster. Freedom from poverty, from struggling day to day, in exchange for 9 months of your life and one simple service." Her eyes met his, and for a moment Mason saw something flicker there, not just desperation but a flash of indignation, quickly suppressed. "What if I refuse?" Mason shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "Then you walk out that door and continue with your life as it is. No harm done, but I should mention that this offer expires tonight. I'm not a patient man, Miss Foster." He watched as Lily flipped through the contract, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. He could almost see the calculations running through her mind, weighing her limited options against this unexpected opportunity. "Can I have some time to think about it?" she asked. "As I said, the offer expires tonight," Mason replied, glancing at his watch. "You have until midnight to decide." Lily stood up suddenly, clutching the contract. "I'll need to read this carefully." "Of course," Mason gestured to a door on the left side of his office. "You can use my private lounge. Take all the time you need until midnight." He watched as she walked to the lounge, her back straight, despite the weight of the decision before her. When the door closed behind her, Mason returned to his desk and poured himself a glass of whiskey. He had chosen well. Lily Foster was perfect for his purposes, desperate enough to accept, yet still possessing a dignity that suggested she would carry herself and his child with grace. 3 hours. Later, as the city lights glowed bright against the night sky, the lounge door opened. Lily emerged, her face pale but composed, the contract in her hand. "I'll need a pen," she said quietly. Mason reached into his desk drawer and extracted a fountain pen, extending it toward her. As she approached to take it, he saw something in her eyes that gave him pause, a determination that hadn't been there before. "Before I sign," Lily said, her voice steady now, "I want to add one condition of my own." Mason raised an eyebrow, his face impassive. "This isn't a negotiation, Ms. Foster." "It is now," she replied, surprising him with her firmness. "I'll sign your contract. I'll have your baby and disappear afterward if that's what you want. But I want the money placed in an escrow account now, not after the birth, as a guarantee of your good faith." For a long moment, Mason simply stared at her, reassessing the woman who stood before him. Then, unexpectedly, a genuine smile touched his lips. "It seems I've underestimated you, Miss Foster." He pressed the intercom button. "Patricia, call Jonathan back. Tell him we need to make an amendment to the contract." An hour later, the modified agreement was signed. Lily Foster would move into Mason's guest house the following day to begin the process that would change both their lives forever. As they shook hands to seal their arrangement, neither could have anticipated how their carefully constructed contract would soon be tested by forces beyond their control, forces of the heart that recognized no legal boundaries. As Mason watched Lily step into the elevator, he felt an unexpected sensation. Not the satisfaction of a successful business transaction, but something more unsettling. For the first time in years, Mason Blackwood felt the stirring of uncertainty, the whisper of a future he could not fully control. Springtime in Connecticut brought a gentle revival to the sprawling Blackwood estate. The 20-acre property in Greenwich, with its manicured gardens and private forest, came alive with blossoms and birdsong. It was a stark contrast to the concrete jungle of Manhattan, where Lily had first entered Mason's life 3 months earlier. The transition from homelessness to living in a luxurious guest house had been jarring. The guest house itself was larger than any apartment Lily had ever occupied, with 3 bedrooms, a fully stocked kitchen, and windows that opened to views of the main house and gardens. It felt like stepping into someone else's life, which, she reminded herself daily, was exactly what she had done. The IVF process had begun immediately after she moved in. Dr. Eleanor Winters, a renowned fertility specialist sworn to secrecy with ironclad NDAs, had overseen the procedure. On her 3rd visit to the clinic, Lily had lain on the examination table, staring at the ceiling as her body became the vessel for Mason Blackwood's legacy. 2 weeks later, the pregnancy was confirmed. Mason had received the news with a brief nod, as if he'd never doubted the outcome. Then he'd handed her a platinum credit card and instructions to purchase whatever she needed for her comfort during the pregnancy. Their interactions remained formal, distant, exactly as outlined in their contract. But as spring progressed into early summer, something began to shift. Perhaps it was the solitude of the estate, or perhaps it was the life growing inside her, but Lily found herself craving human connection in a way she hadn't anticipated. On this particular morning, Lily sat on the terrace of the guest house, watching the gardeners work in the distance. Her hand rested on her abdomen, which was just beginning to show the slightest curve of pregnancy. At 12 weeks, the morning sickness had finally subsided, leaving her with a new clarity and an unexpected restlessness. The sound of footsteps on the stone path made her look up. Mason approached, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him, in dark jeans and a light blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He still looked every inch the billionaire, but there was something less severe about him in the morning light. "Good morning, Miss Foster," he said, his greeting formal as always. "Dr. Winters called with the results of your latest tests. Everything appears to be progressing normally." "That's good to hear," Lily replied, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Would you like to sit? I just made some tea." Mason hesitated, then took the offered seat. "Thank you. Tea would be fine." As Lily poured him a cup, she noticed his eyes briefly glance at her abdomen before quickly looking away. It was the first sign of any personal interest he'd shown in the pregnancy, beyond clinical updates. "The baby started moving last night," she said, passing him the tea. "Just little flutters, but definitely movement." Mason's hand froze momentarily as he reached for the cup. Is that normal, at this stage? Lily smiled slightly. It's a bit early, but not unheard of, especially for someone as slim as me. There's not much cushioning between the baby and the outside world. An awkward silence fell between them. Mason sipped his tea, his gaze now fixed on the distant gardens. You have a beautiful home, Lily said finally, trying to bridge the gap. Have you lived here long? It was my parents' house, Mason replied, his tone neutral. I grew up here, then moved to the city after college. I only returned after my father passed 12 years ago. I'm sorry about your father, Lily said softly. Mason's expression hardened slightly. It was a long time ago. Another silence, heavier this time. Lily had learned to read these shifts in his demeanor, the way he retreated whenever conversation veered toward anything personal. Have you thought about names? She asked, changing the subject. Mason set down his cup. Names? For the baby, Lily clarified. I know it's still early, but I thought you might have some ideas. Family names, perhaps? Mason seemed genuinely caught off guard by the question. I haven't considered it yet. Well, there's plenty of time, Lily said, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach again. Mason's eyes followed the gesture, and something in his expression softened almost, imperceptibly. What about you? Do you have any suggestions? The question surprised her. This was the first time he'd asked for her input on anything related to the baby. I've always liked classic names, she admitted. Nothing too trendy. Something with substance that will age well. Like what? For a boy, perhaps William or James. For a girl, maybe Elizabeth or Catherine. She paused. Of course, it's entirely your decision. Mason nodded, his expression thoughtful. Those are good names, strong names. The conversation lapsed again, but the silence felt different now, less strained, more contemplative. I have my 20-week scan next month, Lily said after a moment. They should be able to tell the gender then, if you want to know. Do you? Mason asked, his eyes meeting hers directly for what felt like the first time. Lily considered the question. I think I do. It would make it more real somehow. Then, yes, Mason said, rising from his chair, I'd like to know. As he turned to leave, Lily called after him. Mr. Blackwood? He paused, looking back. Would you like to come to the appointment, to see the scan? Mason's expression was unreadable. For a moment, Lily thought he might refuse, but then he gave a short nod. I'll have Patricia clear my schedule, he said, and then he was gone, striding back toward the main house with purpose in his step. That evening, as Lily prepared a simple dinner in her kitchen, she heard a knock at the door. Opening it, she found Mason's housekeeper, Mrs. Jenkins, holding a package. Mr. Blackwood asked me to deliver this, the older woman said, handing over a beautifully wrapped box. Alone in her living room, Lily carefully opened the package to find a leather-bound book inside. The cover was embossed with gold lettering, The Complete Works of Shakespeare. A note was tucked inside the front cover, written in Mason's precise handwriting. I thought you might find this useful for name research. Kemepobi, Lily smiled, running her fingers over the soft leather. It wasn't a grand gesture by most standards, but from Mason Blackwood it felt significant, a small crack in the wall he'd built between them. The weeks that followed brought subtle changes to their arrangement. Mason began to visit the guest house more frequently, ostensibly to check on Lily's well-being, but their conversations gradually extended beyond the pregnancy. He learned about her childhood in Ohio, her dreams of becoming a nurse, the series of misfortunes that had left her homeless. In turn, he shared small fragments of his own life, his competitive relationship with his father, his passion for architecture, his collection of rare first-edition books. The day of the 20-week scan arrived on a warm July morning. Mason drove Lily to the private clinic himself, rather than sending his usual driver. In the waiting room, he sat stiffly beside her, his attention focused on his phone, responding to emails with rapid-fire efficiency. When they were called in, Dr. Winters greeted them with professional warmth. Good morning, Miss Foster, Mr. Blackwood. Everything's prepared. Shall we see how your baby is developing? Lily lay back on the examination table, lifting her shirt to expose her now prominent belly. As the doctor applied the cold gel, she glanced at Mason, who stood at a careful distance, his expression guarded but attentive. The room filled with the rhythmic sound of the baby's heartbeat, strong and steady. Dr. Winters moved the ultrasound wand across Lily's abdomen, pointing out features on the monitor. The spine, the profile, the tiny hands and feet. "Would you like to know the sex?" she asked, looking from Lily to Mason. Lily nodded, and Mason stepped closer to the table, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Congratulations," Dr. Winters said with a smile. "You're having a boy." A boy, Mason's heir. Lily felt a complex wave of emotions wash over her, joy, wonder, and an unexpected pang of sorrow for the child she would carry but not raise. She turned to look at Mason and was startled by the expression on his face. His usual mask of control had slipped, revealing something raw and vulnerable. For a brief moment he looked overwhelmed, not the calculating businessman who had proposed their arrangement, but simply a man confronted with the reality of becoming a father. Their eyes met, and in that instant, something unspoken passed between them, a shared acknowledgement of the life they had created together, regardless of the clinical nature of its conception. The moment was broken when Dr. Winters spoke again. "I'm seeing something unusual here. Let me just check." She adjusted the wand, moving it to a different position on Lily's abdomen. Mason tensed. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong," Dr. Winters said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But I'm detecting—" "Yes, there it is. A second heartbeat." "A second what?" Mason's voice was sharp. Dr. Winters looked up, her expression professional, but her eyes alight with surprise. "Congratulations are in order again. You're not having just one baby. You're having twins." The silence that followed was profound. Lily stared at the monitor, trying to process this unexpected development, while Mason seemed frozen in place, his face unreadable. "Are you certain?" he finally asked, his voice controlled once more. "Absolutely," Dr. Winters confirmed, pointing to the screen. "Here's baby A and here's baby B, both male, both developing normally. Fraternal twins, not identical, they each have their own amniotic sac and placenta." "Twins," Lily whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as if to confirm the presence of the two lives within. The drive back to the estate was quiet. Mason kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Lily watched the landscape pass by, stealing occasional glances at his profile, trying to gauge his reaction to the news. "Are you upset?" she finally asked, as they turned into the long driveway of the estate. Mason seemed to consider the question carefully before answering. "Not upset, just recalibrating." Recalibrating. He parked the car in front of the guest house but made no move to exit. "I had planned for one child, one heir, now there will be two." "Is that a problem?" Lily asked, unable to keep a defensive note from her voice. Mason looked at her then, his expression softening slightly. "No, not a problem, just unexpected." As Lily got out of the car, Mason surprised her by coming around to her side, instead of driving onto the main house. "Lily," he said, using her first name for the first time since their arrangement began, "I want you to know that this changes nothing in our agreement. The terms remain the same, 2 children instead of 1, but the rest stays as we planned." His words were meant to be reassuring, but Lily felt a chill pass through her. 2 babies, 2 sons, and she would still walk away from them, as if they were nothing more than the terms of a business contract. "Of course," she said, her voice hollow, "nothing changes." But as she watched Mason walk back to his car, Lily knew that wasn't true. Everything was changing, not just her body, which now carried 2 lives instead of 1, but something deeper, something neither of them had accounted for in their carefully constructed arrangement. That night, alone in her bed, Lily felt the twins move within her, their presence a tangible reminder of the connection that now bound her to Mason Blackwood, a connection that extended far beyond the legal document they had signed. And for the first time since agreeing to their arrangement, Lily allowed herself to cry for what she would gain and what she would lose when these babies came into the world. In the main house, Mason sat in his study, a glass of untouched whiskey on the desk before him, staring at the sonogram images Dr. Winters had given them. 2 sons, 2 heirs. The Blackwood legacy secured twice over. It should have been a moment of triumph, the culmination of his careful planning. Instead, he found himself haunted by the look in Lily's eyes when he'd reminded her of their agreement, and by the undeniable fact that, for a brief moment in that examination room, when he'd heard his son's heartbeats and seen their tiny forms on the monitor, Mason Blackwood, who had spent a lifetime avoiding emotional attachments, had felt something stir within him that no contract could contain or control. Summer faded into autumn, painting the Blackwood estate in rich golds and crimsons. At 28 weeks pregnant with twins, Lily's body had transformed dramatically. Her once slender frame now supported a prominent belly that made even the simplest movements challenging. Dr. Winters had prescribed additional rest, concerned about the increased risks of her twin pregnancy. On this crisp October morning, Lily sat in the sunroom of the main house, a recent development in their arrangement. 2 weeks earlier, Mason had suggested she might be more comfortable in the larger residence, where the staff could attend to her needs more efficiently. The guest house, while spacious, had begun to feel isolating as her mobility decreased. "More tea, Miss Foster?" Mrs. Jenkins asked, appearing silently at her side. "Yes, thank you," Lily smiled at the housekeeper, who had become something of an ally over the past months. As Mrs. Jenkins poured the tea, Mason entered the sunroom, his attire unusually casual. For a Tuesday, dark slacks and a cashmere sweater rather than his customary suit. "You're not going to the office?" Lily asked, surprise evident in her voice. "I've cleared my schedule for the day," Mason replied, taking a seat across from her. Dr. Winters called. "She wants to do another scan this afternoon. I thought I should accompany you." Lily felt a flutter of concern. "Did she say why? Is something wrong?" "Just a precaution," she assured me. "With twins, they monitor more closely." His tone was matter-of-fact, but Lily noticed the slight tension around his eyes, the only indication of his concern. Their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Not quite friendship, certainly not romance, but a partnership of sorts. Mason had begun to take a more active interest in the pregnancy, reading the same books on child development that Lily studied, discussing nursery designs, even attending her regular checkups. Sometimes, in unguarded moments like this one, Lily caught herself forgetting the transactional nature of their arrangement, forgetting that in less than 3 months, she would walk away from this life and these children forever. "I've been thinking about names," Mason said, disrupting her thoughts. "For the boys." "Oh," Lily set down her teacup, giving him her full attention. "I was considering William for the firstborn, as you suggested," he continued, his eyes meeting hers briefly, before shifting to the gardens outside. "And perhaps James for the second." "William and James," Lily repeated softly. "They're perfect. Strong names, like you said." A small smile touched Mason's lips. "They'll need strong names to carry the Blackwood legacy." The mention of the Blackwood name, a name that would never be hers to share, brought Lily sharply back to reality. She shifted uncomfortably, feeling a twinge in her lower back. Mason noticed immediately. "Are you in pain?" "Just the usual backache," Lily assured him. "It's getting more difficult to find a comfortable position these days." Without comment, Mason rose and retrieved a small pillow from the adjacent sofa, placing it behind her back. His fingers brushed against her shoulder as he adjusted it, and Lily felt a now familiar warmth spread through her at his touch, a warmth she tried desperately to ignore. "Better?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "Yes, thank you." The moment hung between them, suspended in the sunlit room, a moment that belonged in a different story, one where she wasn't carrying his children as part of a business transaction, one where the feelings beginning to take root in her heart might have a chance to blossom. Mrs. Jenkins' return broke the spell. "Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Miller is on the phone. He says it's urgent." Mason's expression hardened back into the mask. "Of the businessman. I'll take it in my study." Have the car ready at 2 for Ms. Foster's appointment." As he strode from the room, Lily pressed her hands to her belly, feeling the twins' movements, stronger now, more distinct. Two separate beings, already forming their own personalities. Sometimes she imagined she could distinguish between them, the one on the left more active, the one on the right more deliberate in his movements. "Your daddy is a complicated man," she whispered to them, the word daddy feeling strange on her tongue. In all their discussions about the future, they had never talked about what the boys would call Mason or what they would know of her. The appointment with Dr. Winters began, routinely enough. Blood pressure, weight, measurements, all recorded with professional efficiency. Then Lily was positioned on the examination table for the ultrasound, Mason standing nearby, his attention focused on the monitor. Dr. Winters moved the wand across Lily's abdomen, her expression transitioning from concentration to surprise. "What is it?" Mason asked, immediately alert to the change. Dr. Winters adjusted the angle of the wand, her eyes fixed on the screen. "I'm seeing something unexpected. Give me a moment to confirm." Lily felt her heart rate accelerate. "Are the twins okay?" "The twins are fine," Dr. Winters assured her. "Perfect development for 28 weeks. But I'm detecting—" "Yes, there." "It is." She turned to them, her professional composure intact but her eyes revealing her astonishment. "Mr. Blackwood, Ms. Foster, it appears I missed something in our previous scans. You're not expecting twins, you're expecting triplets." "Triplets?" Mason's voice was barely audible. "Yes. There's a third baby, positioned behind the others, which is why we didn't detect it earlier. It's smaller than the other two, but the heartbeat is strong." "Is it?" Lily began, unable to complete the question. "It's another boy," Dr. Winters confirmed. "3 sons, Mr. Blackwood." The drive back to the estate was silent, the weight of this new revelation hanging heavily between them. 3 children, 3 sons. The contract had never specified a number. Neither of them had considered the possibility of multiples when they'd signed it. Mason pulled the car into the circular driveway of the main house and turned off the engine, but made no move to exit. For several long moments they sat in silence, the only sound the soft ticking of the cooling engine. 3 children, Mason finally said, his voice carefully controlled. 3 boys. Lily turned to look at him, trying to gauge his reaction. Are you upset?" Mason's laugh was short, humorless. "Upset? No, overwhelmed perhaps." He ran a hand through his perfectly groomed hair, a rare gesture of discomposure. "When I proposed our arrangement, I imagined one child, one straightforward addition to my life that I could plan for, prepare for. Now there will be 3, Lily finished for him. 3 babies who will need your attention, your time, your love." The word hung between them, charged with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. "I'm not," Mason began, then stopped himself. "I've never been a particularly paternal man, Lily. I'm not sure I know how to be the father they'll need." It was the first time he'd expressed any doubt, any vulnerability since she'd known him. The admission touched something deep within her. "You'll learn," she said softly, "just as any new parent does." Mason turned to face her fully, his expression unguarded for once. "And you? How do you feel about this development?" The question caught her off guard. In all their discussions about the pregnancy, he had never asked about her feelings. Not about the babies, not about their arrangement. Lily hesitated, uncertain how much truth to reveal. "I'm trying not to become too attached. As per our agreement." Something flickered in Mason's eyes, regret perhaps, or recognition of the impossible position she was in. "The terms of our contract remain the same," he said after a moment, his voice more gentle than she had expected. "But I understand if you need time to adjust to this news." Lily nodded, unable to trust her voice. 3 babies, 3 lives she would carry and deliver, only to walk away from. The pain of it was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. If sensing her distress, Mason reached across the space between them and, in a gesture that surprised them both, covered her hand with his own. His touch was warm, his grip firm. an anchor in the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "We'll figure this out," he said, and for the first time, the "we" felt genuine, not employer and surrogate, but two people facing an unexpected challenge together. The next few weeks brought a flurry of activity to the Blackwood estate. The nursery, originally designed for one child, then expanded for two, was now being reconfigured for three. Mason threw himself into the preparations with uncharacteristic enthusiasm, consulting with top pediatricians, interviewing nanny candidates, ordering custom-made cribs from an artisan in Vermont. Lily watched these developments with mixed emotions. On one hand, she was relieved to see Mason embracing his impending fatherhood. On the other, each nursery item selected, each plan made for the baby's future, was a reminder of her transitory role in their lives. At 32 weeks, with her due date rapidly approaching, Lily found herself in the library of the main house one evening. She had taken to spending time there, surrounded by the comfort of books, finding solace in the quiet elegance of the room. Tonight, she was reviewing a book on infant care, trying to memorize as much as she could, knowledge she would never use for her own children, but somehow needed to possess nonetheless. The sound of the door opening made her look up. Mason entered, carrying a small wooden box. "I thought I might find you here," he said, approaching her chair. "You seem to have claimed this room as your sanctuary." Lily smiled faintly. "I've always loved libraries. My mother was a librarian. Some of my happiest childhood memories are of sitting among the stacks while she worked." Mason's expression softened at this glimpse into her past. "I didn't know that." "There's a lot we don't know about each other," Lily replied, watching as he sat in the leather armchair across from her. "True enough." Mason placed the wooden box on the table between them. "I wanted to show you something." He opened the box carefully, revealing 3 small velvet pouches. From the first, he extracted a silver rattle, its handle worn smooth by generations of use. "This was mine when I was an infant," he explained, turning it in his fingers. "Before that, it belonged to my father, and his father before him. Every Blackwood son has held it since 1887. Lily leaned forward, touched by this unexpected sharing of family history. "It's beautiful. I had 2 more made," Mason continued, opening the remaining pouches to reveal identical silver rattles, gleaming new beside the original. "One for each of the boys. I wanted them to each have their own, but in the same tradition." The gesture moved her deeply, not just the rattles themselves, but what they represented. Mason's acknowledgement of his sons as individuals, as brothers, as a family. "They'll treasure them," she said softly. Mason's eyes met hers, holding her gaze with unusual intensity. "I've been thinking, Lily, about our arrangement." Her heart stuttered in her chest. "Oh?" "With 3 children instead of 1, the situation has become more complex than I anticipated." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I wonder if perhaps we should consider some adjustments to our original agreement." "What kind of adjustments?" Lily asked, scarcely daring to breathe. Before Mason could respond, a sharp pain lanced through Lily's abdomen, causing her to gasp and clutch at her belly. "Lily?" Mason was on his feet immediately, crossing to her side. "What's wrong?" "I don't know," she managed through gritted teeth. "A contraction, maybe, but it's too early." Another pain followed, more intense than the first. Lily's face paled as she felt a warm gush of fluid between her legs. "Mason," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "I think my water just broke." Mason's reaction was immediate. He lifted her into his arms with surprising strength, his face a mask of controlled urgency. "Hold on," he instructed, already striding toward the door. "I'm taking you to the hospital." As no. He carried her to the car, bellowing orders to his staff to call Dr. Winters. Lily felt another contraction ripple through her. 32 weeks, nearly 2 months premature for a singleton, but particularly dangerous for triplets. Fear clutched at her heart, not for herself, but for the 3 tiny lives depending on her body to sustain them. "Stay with me," Mason said, as he placed her carefully in the passenger seat, his voice tight with a concern he couldn't conceal. "Everything's going to be fine." As the car sped down the driveway toward the hospital, Lily looked over at Mason's profile, tense with worry, and realized with sudden clarity that whatever happened next would change them both forever. The neat transactional arrangement they had agreed to months ago was unraveling rapidly, replaced by something messier, more complicated, and infinitely more real. The triplets were coming, ready or not, and with them, a future neither Mason nor Lily had bargained for. The private wing of Greenwich Hospital hummed with the quiet efficiency of expensive medical care. Mason Blackwood's influence had secured not just the best doctors and nurses, but also complete privacy, a separate entrance, additional security, and a strict information blackout. No one outside a carefully vetted circle knew that Lily Foster had been admitted in premature labor with triplets. 57 hours had passed since Lily's water broke in the library. 57 hours of monitored contractions, medication to delay delivery, steroid injections to help the baby's lungs mature, and constant vigilance from a team of specialists. Mason hadn't left the hospital. He'd cancelled meetings, delegated decisions, and set up a makeshift office in an adjacent room. Every few hours he would appear in Lily's doorway, his face drawn with concern he couldn't hide, to ask for updates and inquire about her comfort. On the evening of the third day, Dr. Winters entered Lily's room, her expression grave. Mason, who had been sitting silently in the corner reviewing documents on his tablet, immediately stood. "The medication isn't working as well as we'd hoped," Dr. Winters announced without preamble. "The contractions are increasing in frequency and intensity. I believe we need to proceed with a C-section within the next hour." Lily nodded, her hands instinctively moving to her belly. After days of worry and pain, she felt an odd sense of relief that the waiting was nearly over. "Are the babies strong enough?" Mason asked, his voice controlled but tension evident in the set of his shoulders. "At 32 weeks, they'll need time in the NICU, but their chances are good," Dr. Winters assured him. "The steroids have helped, and all three have strong heartbeats. We're as prepared as we can be." As the medical team prepared for surgery, Lily was struck by a sudden fear, not of the procedure itself, but of the aftermath. Once the babies were born, the clock on her time with them would begin, ticking down inexorably. The terms of the contract were clear. After delivery and a brief recovery period, she would receive her payment and disappear from their lives forever. "Mason," she called softly as a nurse adjusted her IV. He approached her bed, his usual commanding presence somehow muted in the sterile hospital environment. "What do you need?" "After the babies are born," Lily hesitated, uncertain how to express the turmoil of emotions. "Will I be able to see them, to hold them?" Something flickered in Mason's eyes, something that might have been guilt or perhaps recognition of the cruel reality of their arrangement. "Of course," he said finally. "They're your sons too, Lily, at least for now." That qualifying phrase, "at least for now," hung heavily between them as Lily was wheeled into the operating room. Under the bright surgical lights, surrounded by masked medical professionals, she closed her eyes and tried to prepare herself for both the birth of her children and the inevitable loss that would follow. Mason in surgical scrubs sat by her head, a presence both reassuring and painful in its impermanence. As the procedure began, he surprised her by taking her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. "It'll be over soon," he murmured, and Lily wasn't sure if he meant the surgery or their time together. 20 minutes later, the first cry pierced the efficient quiet of the operating room, a sound so small yet so powerful that Lily felt tears spring to her eyes. Dr. Winters' voice rose above the medical chatter. "First boy delivered, 4 pounds, 3 ounces. "William," Mason said softly, his grip on Lily's hand tightening. The second baby followed quickly, his cry slightly stronger than his brother's. "Second boy, 4 pounds even," announced the doctor. "James," Mason whispered, and Lily saw something she'd never witnessed before, tears in Mason Blackwood's eyes. The room fell silent as they waited for the third baby. The tension built as seconds stretched into a minute with no sound. "Come on, little one," Dr. Winters urged, her voice calm but intent. Finally, a third cry, fainter than the others but unmistakably present. Third boy delivered 3 pounds 8 ounces, smaller than his brothers but fighting strong. "We never decided on a third name," Lily realized, looking up at Mason. He met her gaze, his expression open in a way she'd rarely seen. "What would you choose?" The question caught her off guard. This wasn't part of their agreement, this sharing of the naming rights. "I've always loved the name Alexander," she admitted. "William James and Alexander," Mason tested the combination. "The Blackwood brothers. It's perfect." The babies were quickly assessed, stabilized, and transferred to incubators for immediate transport to the neonatal intensive care unit. Lily caught only glimpses of them. Tiny red faces, miniature fingers, delicate bodies dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding them. Her arms ached with the primal need to hold them, to count their fingers and toes, to assure herself they were real. "Go with them," she urged Mason as the medical team prepared to move the babies. "Stay with our sons." He hesitated, torn between following the triplets and remaining with her. "I'll be back soon," he promised, and then he was gone, following the procession of incubators down the hallway. After the surgery was complete and Lily was settled in her recovery room, the hours passed in a haze of medication and fitful sleep. She awoke to find Mason sitting beside her bed, his usual impeccable appearance disheveled, his face showing the strain of the long night. "The boys?" she asked immediately. "Stable," he assured her. "All 3 are on ventilators to help with breathing, but the doctors are cautiously optimistic. William and James are responding well to treatment. Alexander is smaller, but he's fighting." Lily released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "When can I see them?" "They'll bring you to the NICU as soon as you're strong enough to sit in a wheelchair." Mason paused, studying her face. "You should rest now." But rest wouldn't come. Though her body was exhausted from surgery, her mind raced with questions about the babies and about her future without them. The reality of their birth had made the terms of her contract with Mason suddenly, painfully concrete. Late that afternoon, a nurse helped Lily into a wheelchair and took her to the NICU. Mason was already there, standing between 2 of the incubators, his attention fixed on the tiny beings inside. He looked up as she approached, and something in his expression made her heart constrict, a mixture of wonder, fear, and profound vulnerability she'd never seen in him before. "Here they are," he said simply, wheeling her closer to the incubators. Lily's breath caught as she saw her sons for the first time, each in his own clear plastic box attached to monitors and breathing apparatus. They seemed impossibly small and fragile. Yet there was life in them, determined, resilient life that brought tears to her eyes. "They're beautiful," she whispered, placing her hand against the plastic of William's incubator. Inside, his tiny chest rose and fell with mechanical assistance, his skin still wrinkled and red. "They look like you," Mason said unexpectedly. "Something around the eyes." Lily looked up at him, surprised by the observation. It was the first acknowledgement of her genetic contribution to the children who, according to their agreement, would never know her. For hours they sat together in the NICU watching over their sons. Occasionally a nurse would update them on vital signs or make adjustments to the equipment. Mostly, though, they simply waited and watched, bound together. In a vigil, neither had anticipated when they'd signed their contract. On the 4th day after the birth, as Lily sat beside Alexander's incubator, gently touching his tiny hand through the medical glove built into the side of the enclosure, she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. The baby's skin, initially red and wrinkled like all newborns, was beginning to settle into its natural tone, a tone noticeably darker than either hers or Mason's. As William and James's incubators were moved closer for a routine check, the difference became undeniable. All 3 boys shared the same warm brown skin tone, a genetic impossibility given their parentage, as both Lily and Mason were fair-skinned. Mason, returning from a brief call outside the NICU, stopped abruptly when he saw all 3 babies aligned. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something harder as he processed what he was seeing. "Mason," Lily began, her voice low and urgent. "I don't understand." "Neither do I," he cut her off, his tone colder than she'd heard in months. "But I intend to find out." He strode out of the NICU without another word, leaving Lily staring after him in shock and confusion. The implication was clear. He suspected she had somehow broken their agreement, that the babies weren't his. The very idea was absurd. She hadn't been with anyone since long before their arrangement began, and the IVF procedure had been performed under the strictest controls. Yet the evidence was before their eyes. 3 beautiful baby boys, whose appearance suggested a heritage neither of them possessed. 2 hours later, Mason returned to the NICU with Dr. Winters. Their hushed conversation took place just outside Lily's hearing, but she could see the tension in Mason's posture, the clipped efficiency of his gestures as he pointed toward the babies. Dr. Winters approached Lily, her expression professionally neutral. "Miss Foster, Mr. Blackwood has requested genetic testing to confirm paternity. This is standard in unusual situations, and given the circumstances." "The circumstances being that my babies don't look the way you expected," Lily finished, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. "The circumstances being medically unexpected outcomes," Dr. Winters corrected gently. "The tests are simple, just a cheek swab from each of the boys and from both parents. Results should be available within 48 hours. "Fine," Lily agreed, too exhausted to argue. She knew the truth. The babies had been conceived through IVF using Mason's sperm and her eggs. Whatever explanation there might be for their appearance, it wasn't infidelity on her part. The next 2 days passed in strained silence. Mason continued to visit the NICU but kept his distance from Lily, his expression guarded, his manner formal. The warm companionship they had developed over the months of her pregnancy had vanished, replaced by cold suspicion that cut deeper than Lily had expected. On the morning the test results were due, Lily sat alone in her hospital room, staring out the window at the autumn rain. The babies were improving daily. William and James had been taken off the ventilators, and Alexander was showing signs of following suit. Yet instead of joy, Lily felt only a profound sadness. Even if the tests proved what she already knew, that Mason was the father, the damage had been done. His immediate suspicion, his withdrawal, had revealed the fragility of whatever connection had grown between them. When the time came for her to leave, as their contract stipulated, there would be no reason to look back, no foundation for the co-parenting arrangement she had begun to secretly hope for. The door opened and Mason entered, followed by Dr. Winters. One look at their faces told Lily that the results had arrived. "Miss Foster," Dr. Winters began, her tone carefully neutral, "we have the paternity test results." Lily straightened in her chair, bracing herself. "And?" "The tests confirm that Mr. Blackwood is, without question, the biological father of all 3 boys. Relief washed over Lily, followed immediately by indignation. "Of course he is. I never doubted it." "There's more," Dr. Winters continued. "Given the unexpected characteristics of the infants, we ran additional genetic analysis. The results indicate that Mr. Blackwood carries genetic markers consistent with African ancestry, specifically approximately 25% West African heritage. This genetic contribution, combined with your own genetic makeup, explains the baby's appearance." Lily turned to Mason, whose face had gone perfectly still. "You didn't know?" "No," he said, his voice barely audible. "I didn't. Dunno." Dr. Winters excused herself tactfully, leaving them alone with this revelation. For several long minutes, neither spoke. Mason stood by the window, his back to Lily, his shoulders rigid with tension. "My father was always obsessed with our family lineage," he finally said, still facing away from her. "The Blackwood name, the Blackwood legacy. He traced our ancestry back 8 generations, all prominent, all respected, all." He trailed off. "All white," Lily finished for him. Mason turned then, and the raw vulnerability in his expression startled her. It seems my father's meticulous family history had some convenient omissions, some secrets he chose to bury. Or maybe he didn't know either, Lily suggested gently. Mason laughed without humor. Oh, he knew. My father controlled every aspect of our family narrative. If there was African ancestry in our lineage, he deliberately concealed it. Does it matter? Lily asked, watching him carefully. Does it change how you feel about the boys? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications about identity, heritage, and love. Mason moved to sit in the chair opposite her, his face troubled but thoughtful. When I first saw them, when I saw their skin tone, I felt. He hesitated, searching for words. Betrayed, Lily supplied. You thought I had deceived you. Mason nodded slowly. Yes, but there was something else too. Something I'm not proud of. He met her eyes directly. For a moment I wondered if it would be visible to others, if people would look at them and know they weren't purely of my lineage as I understood it. And now, Lily pressed, her heart racing, now that you know they are entirely yours, just with a heritage you didn't know you had. Mason was silent for a long moment, his gaze turning to the window, to the rain tracing patterns down the glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, stripped of pretense, raw with an honesty she had rarely heard from him. Now I realize how little any of that matters. When I look at them, at William, James, and Alexander, I don't see lineage or heritage or legacy. I just see my sons. He turned back to her, his eyes suspiciously bright. Our sons. The emphasis on our wasn't lost on Lily. It was the first time he had truly acknowledged her claim to the children, not just as the vessel who carried them, but as their mother. Mason, she began hesitantly, about our contract. He held up a hand to stop her. The contract was a mistake, Lily, a cold, calculated attempt to control something that can't be controlled. These past months, watching you carry our children, seeing your strength and grace, it changed me. And these past days, fearing for their lives, praying for their survival, it shattered whatever was left of my detachment. He leaned forward, taking her hands in his. I don't want you to leave after your recovery. I don't want to raise our sons alone. I want... He stopped, seeming almost surprised by the force of his own emotions. I want us to be a family. A real family, not a business arrangement. Lily felt tears well in her eyes, tears of relief and hope and cautious joy. Are you sure? This isn't what you planned. Mason's laugh was genuine this time, warm and slightly rueful. Nothing about this has gone according to plan. 3 sons instead of 1, a heritage I never knew I had, and feelings for you that were never part of the contract. He squeezed her hands gently. I'm not good at this, Lily, at vulnerability, at opening myself to another person. But I want to try, for the boys, for us. Us, Lily repeated softly, testing the word, the concept. If you'll stay, Mason added, a hint of uncertainty creeping into his voice. If you want this too. Lily thought of the long journey that had brought her here, from homelessness to this hospital room, from a desperate agreement to the threshold of something genuine and precious. She thought of their sons fighting for their lives in the NICU, unaware of the transformative power they already wielded over their parents' hearts. I'll stay, she said simply, and as Mason's face broke into a smile of genuine relief and happiness, Lily knew that the contract that had once defined their relationship had been replaced by something far more binding and infinitely more valuable. 1 year later, the December snow fell gently outside the windows of the Blackwood estate, transforming the grounds into a winter wonderland. Inside, the house that had once felt cold and austere was alive with warmth and laughter as preparations for the triplets' first birthday celebration were underway. Lily stood in the nursery, a spacious room with 3 identical cribs that had long since been moved from their original placement against the wall to a triangular arrangement in the center, allowing the brothers to see each other. She was adjusting Alexander's bow. Tie, a miniature version of the ones his brothers already wore, while William and James crawled energetically on the playmat nearby. There you go, little man, she murmured, planting a kiss on Alexander's forehead. though still smaller than his brothers. He had overcome his initial health challenges with a determination that seemed to be a family trait. His smile, wide and trusting, never failed to squeeze Lily's heart with a love so intense it sometimes took her breath away. "Need some help in here?" Mason's voice came from the doorway. He was dressed in a charcoal suit, his own bow tie a matching blue to the boys. "Just finished," Lily replied, lifting Alexander into her arms, though keeping them clean until the guests arrive will be the real challenge. Mason crossed the room and scooped up William, who had been making a determined crawl toward a shelf of books. "This one's plotting an escape, as usual." He lifted the baby high, eliciting a squeal of delight. "Just like your mother, always with a book in sight." The casual reference to her as their mother still sent a ripple of contentment through Lily. So much had changed in the year since the triplets' birth, most significantly, the relationship between her and Mason. After the revelation about Mason's genetic heritage and his heartfelt request for her to stay, they had begun the delicate process of rebuilding their relationship on a new foundation, not a contract, but a partnership based on mutual respect and growing affection. The legal documents that had once defined their arrangement had been ceremoniously shredded one evening 6 months ago, replaced by a different kind of commitment. "Mrs. Jenkins says the caterers are all set up downstairs," Mason reported, bending to retrieve James, who had crawled to his feet and was tugging at his pant leg. "And the photographer will be here in an hour." "I still think a professional photographer for a first birthday party is excessive," Lily said, adjusting her emerald green dress with her free hand. Mason gave her a look of mock offense. "Nothing. Here's excessive for the Blackwood triplets' first birthday." "The Blackwood Foster triplets," Lily corrected with a smile. The hyphenated surname had been her suggestion, a way to honor both their heritages. After discovering his African ancestry, Mason had embarked on a journey of exploration, researching the family history his father had concealed. He'd traced his lineage back to a great-great-grandmother named Eliza Johnson, a free black woman who had married into the Blackwood family in the 1870s, only to have her existence nearly erased from family records by subsequent generations determined to present a pure European lineage. The discovery had been transformative for Mason. The man who had once been obsessed with control and legacy now embraced the complexity and richness of his true heritage. Pictures of Eliza, recovered from historical archives, now hung prominently in the main hall alongside other Blackwood ancestors. "Have you heard from Jonathan about the foundation paperwork?" Lily asked as they carried the boys downstairs. "Finalized yesterday," Mason confirmed. "The Eliza Johnson Blackwood Foundation will be operational by the new year. I've appointed Maria Chen as executive director. Her experience with housing initiatives for single mothers makes her perfect for the role." The foundation had been Mason's idea, a non-profit dedicated to helping homeless women and families transition to stable housing and employment. It was his way of honoring not only his newly discovered ancestor, but also Lily's journey and the circumstances that had brought them together. In the grand foyer, Mrs. Jenkins waited to help with the babies. "The first guests are arriving, Mr. Blackwood," she informed them, taking Alexander from Lily's arms with practiced ease. "Are you ready for this?" Mason asked quietly as the housekeeper carried the babies to the adjacent room where their play area had been set up. Lily smoothed her dress nervously. "As ready as I'll ever be to introduce our somewhat unconventional family to Greenwich society." Despite living together for a year and raising the triplets as a united front, today marked their first significant social event as a family. Mason had kept their private life carefully shielded from public scrutiny, but the boys' first birthday had felt like the right time to step out of the shadows. The guest list included Mason's business associates, local dignitaries, and a few carefully selected members of the press who had agreed to Mason's strict terms regarding privacy and the narrative they would present. "We don't owe them explanations," Mason reminded her, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips in a gesture that still made her pulse quicken. "We're just celebrating our son's birthday with friends." The sound of the doorbell announced the first arrivals. As Mason moved to greet them, Lily took a moment to absorb the scene around her. The magnificent Christmas tree in the corner adorned with ornaments in the triplets' birth month's gemstone colors, the tasteful birthday decorations that managed to be both festive and elegant, the photograph of her and Mason with the newborns prominently displayed on the entry table. If someone had told her 2 years ago, when she was sleeping in shelters and struggling to find her next meal, that this would be her life, she would have dismissed it as a cruel fantasy. Yet here she was, a mother to 3 beautiful boys, partner to a man who had transformed from a cold businessman into a devoted father and loving companion. The party progressed smoothly, the triplets charming everyone with their matching outfits and distinct personalities, already evident at just 1 year old. William, the eldest by minutes, was bold and curious, always at the center of activity. James was more deliberate, observing before engaging. Alexander, the smallest but most determined, was content to play independently but always aware of his brother's locations. Lily circulated among the guests, now comfortable in her role as hostess of the Blackwood estate. She had come to know many of Mason's business associates over the past year, gradually winning them over with her intelligence and genuine warmth. Those who might have initially judged their relationship had been disarmed by the obvious devotion they shared, both to each other and to their sons. Midway through the afternoon, Mason clinked a spoon against his champagne glass, gathering everyone's attention. The room quieted as he stood at the center, the triplets now corralled in a playpen nearby, supervised by Mrs. Jenkins. "Thank you, all for coming to celebrate this special day with our family," Mason began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "A year ago, these 3 young men came into the world and changed everything for the better." Murmurs of agreement and affectionate laughter rippled through the guests. But today, we're celebrating more than just their first birthday. Mason's eyes found Lily's across the room, and the look he gave her sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Lily, would you join me, please?" Curious, Lily made her way to his side, wondering what he had planned. Mason was not typically one for public speeches or sentimental gestures. When she reached him, he took her hand in his voice lowering slightly, though still audible to those nearby. "A year ago, I asked you to stay and help me raise our sons. It was the best decision I've ever made, but it was only the beginning." To Lily's shock, Mason reached into his pocket and lowered himself to one knee before her. A collective gasp went up from the assembled guests. "Lily Foster," he said, opening a small velvet box to reveal a stunning emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. "You came into my life when I thought I wanted nothing more than an heir to my name. Instead, you gave me a family, taught me to open my heart, and showed me what truly matters." His voice, usually so controlled, wavered slightly with emotion. "Will you marry me? Not because of our sons, but because I love you more than I ever thought possible." The room fell completely silent as every eye turned to Lily. She stood, frozen, looking down at Mason, the powerful, formidable man now on one knee before her, vulnerability and hope written plainly on his face. "Mason," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Then louder for all to hear, "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Applause erupted as Mason slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to embrace her. Over his shoulder, Lily could see their sons, watching curiously from their playpen, too young to understand the significance of the moment, but somehow aware that something important was happening. As Mason stepped back, he kept hold of her hand, turning to address their guests once more. "I know our story is unconventional," he acknowledged with a smile. "It began with a contract and ended with love, the very thing I was trying to avoid." Laughter rippled through the room, warm and approving. "When I proposed our original arrangement to Lily, I thought I was maintaining control over my life. Instead, I discovered that the greatest gift is surrendering that control to love, to family, to the beautiful chaos of raising 3 strong-willed boys who have their mother's compassion and resilience." Lily squeezed his hand, touched by his words and the journey they represented. The man who had once been determined to avoid emotional entanglements was now declaring his love before a room full of Greenwich's elite, and looking happier than she had ever seen him. After the formal announcement, the celebration continued with renewed energy. Lily found herself accepting congratulations from all sides, the emerald ring catching the light with every movement of her hand. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. this public acknowledgement of the love that had grown between them so unexpectedly. Later, as the party began to wind down, Lily found a quiet moment alone with Mason in his study. The triplets had been taken upstairs by their nannies for their afternoon nap, exhausted from the excitement and attention. "You surprised me," she said, leaning against his desk as he poured them each a glass of champagne. "I had no idea you were planning to propose today." Mason handed her a flute, his eyes warm with affection. "I surprised myself, if I'm being honest. I've had the ring for months, waiting for the right moment." He touched his glass to hers with a gentle clink. "But seeing you today, with our boys, with our guests, I couldn't wait any longer." From a business contract to a marriage proposal, Lily marveled, sipping the champagne. "We've come a long way in a year. And the best is yet to come." Mason set down his glass and reached for her free hand, tracing the emerald ring with his thumb. "I never told you why I chose an emerald instead of a traditional diamond. I assumed it was because you know I love green," Lily said, admiring the way the stone caught the light. "That's part of it," Mason acknowledged, "but emeralds have a deeper meaning. Unlike diamonds, which are valued for their flawlessness, emeralds are prized for their inclusions, the unique patterns and characteristics that make each stone distinctive." His gaze met hers, intense and sincere. "Emeralds are valued not despite their flaws, but because of them. Like us, Lily, like our family, perfect in our imperfections." Lily set down her champagne and wrapped her arms around his neck, deeply moved by the sentiment. "I love you, Mason Blackwood." "And I love you, Lily Foster, soon to be Lily Blackwood Foster," he replied, his arms encircling her waist. Their kiss was interrupted by the study door swinging open as Jonathan Miller entered, then stopped abruptly. "Sorry," he apologized, already backing out. "I didn't realize—" "It's fine, Jonathan," Mason said, keeping one arm around Lily's waist. "What is it?" Jonathan cleared his throat, a knowing smile playing at his lips. "The reporter from the Times would like one more statement about the foundation before she leaves. And congratulations, by the way, it's about time." After he left, Lily laughed softly. "He's been waiting for this, hasn't he?" "They all have," Mason admitted with a rueful smile. "Apparently I've been obviously in love with you for months. Patricia had a betting pool going on when I'd finally propose. And who won? Mrs. Jenkins. She said I wouldn't be able to resist making a grand gesture at the boy's birthday party." He shook his head in mock dismay. "My own staff knowing me, better than I know myself, how the mighty have fallen." "In the best possible way," Lily assured him, rising on tiptoes to kiss him once more. They rejoined the party, hand in hand, to give the reporter her statement and see off the last of their guests. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the snow-covered lawn, Lily stood at the window of the main salon, watching the caterers pack up their vehicles. "Penny for your thoughts," Mason said, appearing at her side with a sleeping Alexander in his arms. Lily smiled, gently stroking the baby's dark curls. "I was just thinking about the night we signed that contract. How scared I was, how alone, how I never could have imagined this would be my life a year later." "Any regrets?" Mason asked, his voice soft enough not to wake the sleeping child. "Not one," Lily replied with absolute certainty. "Though sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed." A commotion from the adjacent room drew their attention. Mrs. Jenkins appeared in the doorway, her usually composed demeanor slightly frazzled. "Mr. Blackwood, Miss Foster. William has managed to climb onto the bookshelf, and James is attempting to follow him." Mason laughed, handing Alexander to Lily. "Duty calls, the Blackwood Foster adventure continues." "And I wouldn't have it any other way," Lily said, following him toward the sound of delighted baby giggles and Mrs. Jenkins' distressed admonitions. That night, after the triplets had been bathed, read to and finally settled into their cribs, Lily and Mason sat on the window seat in the nursery, watching over their sleeping sons in the gentle glow of the nightlight. "I've been thinking," Mason said, his arm around Lily's shoulders as she leaned against his chest, "about the foundation." "What about it?" Lily asked, her voice hushed to avoid waking the babies. "I want to expand its scope. Not just housing assistance, but educational opportunities too. Scholarships, mentoring programs, things that could have helped you when you lost your parents and had to drop out of nursing school. Lily looked up at him, touched by his thoughtfulness. That would make a real difference for so many people. I was thinking you might want to lead that initiative, Mason suggested. You have first-hand experience, and your compassion would guide it in the right direction. Me? Lily was genuinely surprised. I don't have any experience running. You have exactly the experience that matters, Mason interrupted gently. And you're not giving yourself enough credit. I've seen you handle my business associates, charm city officials, and manage a household with 3 infants. You're more capable than you realize. Lily considered the proposal, warming to the idea. I could finish my nursing degree first. It would lend credibility to the program. Whatever you want, Mason agreed. The foundation is yours to shape. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the rise and fall of their son's breathing, Lily reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them all together. From a desperate contract between strangers to a family bound by love, it was a transformation neither of them could have predicted. Do you ever wonder, she asked softly, what would have happened if I hadn't been sitting on that bench in Bryant Park that day? If your assistant hadn't noticed me and mentioned to you that I might be a candidate for your arrangement? Mason was quiet for a moment, considering. I believe some people are meant to find each other, he said finally. If not that day, then another. If not in that way, then differently. But we would have found each other eventually. It was a surprisingly romantic notion from a man who had once approached fatherhood as a business transaction. Lily turned to face him, cupping his cheek in her palm. Mason Blackwood, you continue to surprise me. I hope to do so for the rest of our lives, he replied, covering her hand with his own. The emerald ring caught the soft light, its green depths holding the promise of their future. A future built not on control or calculation, but on the messy, beautiful, unpredictable foundation of love. As William stirred in his sleep, making the little snuffling sound that usually preceded waking for a midnight feeding, Mason and Lily exchanged a look of mutual understanding. The challenges of raising triplets were real and constant, exhausting, overwhelming at times, but also infinitely rewarding. I've got him, Mason said, rising to attend to their son before his cries could wake his brothers. Lily watched as Mason lifted William gently from his crib, murmuring soothing words as he carried him to the changing table. The sight of this powerful man tenderly caring for their child still made her heart swell with emotion. A year ago, Mason Blackwood had offered her a contract, believing he could control life, legacy, and even love. Instead, he had received the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover that true wealth lay not in power or possessions, but in the family they had created together. As Mason returned to the window seat with a now contented William, Lily made room for them beside her. The 4 of them, soon to be joined by James and Alexander when they inevitably woke, formed a tableau that would have been unimaginable when their journey began. But as Lily had learned, the most beautiful stories often emerged from the most unexpected beginnings. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white, while inside the warmth of the Blackwood estate, a family born of contract but transformed by love looked forward to all the beautiful chapters yet to be written. Fim da Historia. Dear listeners, we hope you've been touched by Mason and Lily's journey from contract to connection. For more emotional stories that explore the complexities of love and family, we've prepared a special playlist of equally captivating narratives. Just click on the link to your left. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore life's unexpected twists and turns. Don't miss our upcoming content, and we look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments below.